Hi, this is Gift Constable, and this is a pre-lecture for the Modeling Business Impact class that I teach on Maven. I'm going to cover a few sort of things that I want people to absorb before we get into the class. I'm going to go through a really simple spreadsheet example just to highlight a few sort of concepts and techniques. Might be useful for those of you who are new to this, or just sort of refresher for people that are more familiar with modeling. A lot of the class itself is going to be just, you get better at this stuff through practice. And so we're going to be practicing every week. We're going to be doing modeling out different kind of business problems. Um, and then touching upon sort of tips and tricks as we go. So here's a few things sort of as a beginner. Now, the first thing I actually want to note, and I'm going to share my screen as I'm talking here, is that there is, for those of you who are a little less familiar with modeling and spreadsheeting, there's a free resource that I've put on the web. And and you can find it here, either with this QR code or this link that you could see on the screen. And and I'll be sharing this out to the class as well. But this is free for anyone to access. I built this in Google Spreadsheets, and it's a little workbook that covers some sort of spreadsheet modeling best practices, some common formulas and techniques that are used. And so, again, if you want a refresher or you're new to this, I would advise just like going through and exposing yourself to the things in the workbook because it'll give you tools that will make your life easier as you're doing the models in the class itself. All right, let's like I say, keep this moving along and go through a few overview concepts, and then this sort of example. Um, Now, to take a step back, like why this class, right? I created the Modeling Business Impact class, and I actually tried to make it very accessible and affordable to folks because I was seeing as I was teaching the Financial Fluency for Product Leaders class. So teaching a class about finance, I realized that lots of people in the class who either come from product management, engineering, or design, they were very good at analyzing data, but they were much less well-versed, sort of newer to or more uncomfortable with modeling things out, where you have to sort of project out possible future scenarios. But that's a really important skill, especially as you get more senior, as you become an executive. It's a really important skill for making informed decisions. So it's a technique and a way of thinking and doing that I want just a lot more people to become more comfortable with. So that it becomes not a big lift, but just something that you do as you're thinking through business decisions. And why do we model? We model because we're bad at doing math in our heads. Most of us, there's a few people that are brilliant at it, but most of us are not great at managing multiple variables, thinking about different levels of impact, and thinking through sort of what if scenarios as to, you know, two or three possible relative options and two or three possible levels of probability. And then how do you make a decision from that, right? Or if we just do that through intuition, we get led astray, right? Because we don't understand the systems as well as we think we do. We don't we don't have the ability to spot the sort of critical inputs, the critical risks, those critical assumptions as well as we think we do. And we're not as good at judging relative impact of one thing versus another. And so, like, why leave it abstract to our brains when we're not naturally good at this stuff when there's tools that we could use to make it better? Now, there's AI tools and there's some specialist tools. Most things that you're going to be working with can be done in a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets do break when you're working with massive amounts of data. They don't scale to massive amounts of data, or where you have a zillion variables that you need to be playing with. In those cases, you want to be using other tools. You may need to use some custom software programming. There are things that are out there to help you. I think AI is going to become increasingly powerful. But what I'm hoping is that it's not something that you just sort of offload to an AI, because part of the process, and I'll be talking through this all through the class as well as now, is using modeling as a way of thinking through the problem that you have, right? That's the really important part. The model is not important unto itself. The decisions that it drives, the thinking that it drives, the understanding that it drives, that's why it's powerful. Not the model. The model itself is throwaway, right? The work we're going to do in the class is all going to be done in spreadsheets. Now, Models, however, whatever tool you use, models allow us to do three things: understand, imagine, and align. And decide, I sort of put in align. Understand, right? As I said, when you create a model, and this could be of the flow of customers into your product or how they get into your product and then engage with your product and either decide to stick around, upgrade, or leave. Or it could be, you know, costing out, um, different possibilities for um, the software that you build and what that's going to mean for the compute requirements that you're going to have and how many millions of dollars it's going to be. Or it could be very operational that, sort of laying out how a factory floor moves and how labor moves and what the costs are or the number of sort of products that get generated. I mean, it doesn't matter. It could be anything, right? Um, when you create a model, you have to understand your system at a very granular level. It's never good to create a model from like at a super like 10,000 feet number. You kind of want to work from the bottom up when you're creating models. And what that does is it forces you to think through what's important and what needs to be in the model versus what can I leave aside so that I'm not overcomplicating things, and how does it work? How do customers actually get into my product? What do they actually do? If I change something, what's that behavior change going to be? How does that then connect to a churn or an upgrade or revenue in some way or profit in some way, right? You've got to think through your context, your system, your inputs. What's the data you have to work with? What guesses have to be made? The model allows you and forces you to like get granular and get real about this stuff. And it exposes like, oh crap, I don't know how that works. Or if we make this improvement, I don't know what it's going to do. I don't have an informed guess, right? That doesn't have to stop you, right? You can make uninformed guesses and think through, all right, there's like from the crazy to the reasonable to the like massively optimistic, and what do those things look like? And that's part of number two, which is imagine. What a model allows you to do is, okay, if you understand your system, even if there's guesses in there, which is okay, you understand your system, how it works. If we make these changes, if we do these things, what's going to happen, right? And what are the possible outcomes if, from a best case to worst case scenario on sort of the key, most important variables that we have? And so it allows you to sort of play out the future and think through possibilities and say, okay, if these things happen, what do we think we should do? Is that a good idea? Is it a bad idea? And how does that relate to the possibilities of an alternative thing we could do? And which one's better? And which one's more risky, et cetera. So part of it's understanding. Then it allows you to sort of play things out and imagine possible futures. And the last one, which is really important, especially if you're getting more senior, is alignment. As you're building your model, creating a model is an opportunity to have conversations, right? I just gave an example of like modeling people coming into your product. Well, you're going to have some assumptions around how many people they are and how they convert and where they've come from, and maybe different quality levels of customer and different conversion rates or different activities they do later or different levels they buy. There's a whole bunch of assumptions and everything I just rattled off, right? And those are opportunities to go have conversations with your colleagues in marketing or in finance or in operations or in customer success or whatever part of the company that whatever you're working on connects to, IT, you name it, right? And so as you're building your model, there's opportunities to go and talk to people and say, what do you think is going to happen? Or these inputs that I have into my system, do you think those are right? And in having those conversations, you can often spot whether you're generally aligned with someone as to where you're trying to go or you're not aligned with someone. And that's powerful. You want to know that. And as you're building out your model and building out your scenarios, instead of now people just sort of, one person's arguing their intuition here and the other person arguing their intuition there, and it just gets to be this battle of ego and who's more powerful, you actually are working off of informed guesses and data, and that helps people understand, okay, now I understand like why you're making that decision. And even if they still think it's the wrong idea, it does allow teams to align and come together and say, all right, we're going to commit to this decision. We're making an informed decision. with the best knowledge that we have, even if that means it's partial knowledge. Like there's nothing, rarely in business is everything totally clear cut. We don't have magic crystal balls, but we make informed guesses. That's what we do. And so, like, involving people in the inputs, involving people into the guesses that you're trying to make and what those outputs are and what that means. Just it drives decisions, drives alignment around decisions. And that's good for you as you're going into the decision, as you're making the decision, and frankly, also as you're trying to hold to that decision afterwards so it doesn't get relitigated unnecessarily right away. So ultimately, this is about making better business decisions, better thinking, and better business decisions. But these are the three steps, the three things that are sort of key parts of that. So I want to dive into a little example, and then we'll wrap this up. And my super simple example actually isn't around product. I'm going super simple just to highlight a few things. Let's pretend that I'm a coffee shop owner. I have a small little coffee shop. There's moments, and I'm the only one who works there. I work all day, and there's moments where I have too many customers than I can handle. I just can't put out enough coffee to take those customers on. And so people give up, they don't jump in the line, and I know that I'm missing out on revenue. And I could hire a second barista to work with me. And the question is, should I? If I did, what is that going to mean for me financially? So let's just go into a little model. I always begin with a blank spreadsheet, as I said, and let's talk about how I might build something even as simple as this. And what this does is it highlights things that I sort of want to call out for more complex things that you might do. I always begin actually by turning off grid lines in a spreadsheet. When you go into a blank spreadsheet, it looks like this. I always begin by turning those off. I just think they add a lot of visual and mental noise. You can choose whether you want to do that yourself. And then what I do is I usually start by trying to put my key inputs, the things that I know are going to be important for my model, in one place. It could be on the same tab as my model. It could be on a separate tab. It could be on multiple tabs, but I tend to like to group the key inputs so that it's easy to find and make sense of. And in this super simple example, I have a few inputs that I've considered, right? I need to know how much my barista is going to cost if I hire another barista, and I've put in $20 an hour. I need to know if I sell more product, what am I going to make? And for that, I could have done that in a really complicated way. I decided to simplify this down to just what's my gross average order value, right? Again, I could have modeled that out as to what's a big order, a medium order, and a small order. But for this little example, I just said, let's just start with what the average order value was. Now, when you're creating your model, you got to think through your inputs really carefully, right? I'm a business owner here. I've got my little coffee shop. Do I want to model out revenue? Do I want to model out the sort of gross profit impact that's going to happen? Do I want to model out the bottom line? And in my case, I decided, let me think about the gross profit of the coffee after the labor and after the materials are taken out. And the labor costs I'm going to build into my model just by using my barista, my cost per hour for my hourly employee that I'm potentially hiring. The way I wanted to get gross profit baked in to the rest is I actually said I'm going to work with my gross AOV. So if I take the order value and I take out the cost of the coffee beans, of the materials, I'm left with my gross AOV. This is not important other than to use it as an example of how you have to carefully think through which inputs you choose as you're creating a model, right? I also put a note next to my choice and my number. And when you're creating your inputs, it's really powerful to actually put notes as to where these numbers come from or why they were chosen. And the reason why is that, you're going to do a model, you're going to put it down, you might need to pick it up 3 months later, and you're going to totally forget where these things came from. So you do yourself a favor, future-proof your models so you don't confuse yourself down the road, and just put these little, document what you're doing, put these little notes in. Now, I could have also modeled out how many orders I had and what the costs were going to be in a lot of different ways. I could have just said, I sell this many per day. How many more am I going to sell? I felt like that was too high level, right? I think models are more powerful when they get a little more bottom up. I could have gone really bottom up, which was to say different kind of order types and what's it like on a Monday versus a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the weekend. I decided for this example to keep this relatively simple, but I talked through this because these are the things you have to think through, right? How detailed and granular do you want your model to be versus where could you abstract out? Like that you have to decide for yourself. And you're constantly asking yourself, am I too complicated or am I too simple? What I call the Goldilocks principle, right? Is you don't want to be too complicated and you don't want to be too simple. You want it to be just right. So here I said, let me think about my average day. Let me think about in each hour, how many customers do I have coming in? What's the average order value? I know I picked my average order value for those customers. And, over the course of the day, as people want their coffee in the morning and then they get sleep in the afternoon, how many things do I sell? How many customers do I have per day? I can work with that now to create a little model. So I've done that. On a new tab, I created a little model that looks like this. It's referencing back to that inputs tab, but this is where my logic is going to be. Now, to be honest with you, a lot of times when I'm building models, a lot of what I'm doing is sort of forecasting out what's going to happen over the next 12, 24, 36 months. And so for models like that, what I will do is my logic will flow vertically and my time will flow left and right. It'll be month one, month two, month three, month four, etc. For this very simple model where I was just actually looking at a snapshot of of a day, I didn't have a temporal thing I was working on. So rather than having time work left to right, I just did my model left to right. But I wanted to point this out that as a general rule, you actually more often than not will have your logic working up and down here. But as I say, there's no one way to do these things. So I just, always go with what feels simplest at the time. So I have my hours. I have how many customers are currently coming in. You'll notice I've got some different colors happening on this spreadsheet. What I do is if I'm referencing an input on another tab, I will often make that maroon. Some people make those green. If I'm putting a number, if I'm hard coding a number, you could see in the cell, it's not a formula, it's an actual number, 0 or 30. If I'm actually hard coding it, I always make that blue. That's really important so that it pops out at you, it jumps out at you that this is a hard-coded number. For things that are formulas, I leave them black. Okay. So I've got my hours. I've got the number of customers. All this is doing is referencing my input tab, number of customers right now. And then I had to make a guess as to if I hire a new barista, um, what's it going to do? How's it going to improve? So I said I can get 30% more customers in the first hour, 40% more, 30%. And then I don't have lines out the door during the next portion of the day until 2 o'clock and there's a rush and then it's empty again. While I am selling coffee during that time, as you could see here, I don't think I'm selling so much that a second person's going to help me. So I have 0% lift for these sort of late morning and afternoon and evening hours. Okay, given that, right, how many new orders am I selling? So I can calculate the total potential of orders. I can do the delta of 130 minus 100 to say, okay, I'm actually selling 30 new orders in the first hour, 60 in the next hour, 33 in the next hour. And given that, I can calculate my revenue, right? It's being calculated off that $3 gross average order value. Now I have my cost of the barista, so I know for the total number of hours in my day, I multiply that by again, it's referencing the cell, my $20 per hour, right? I know my total cost. So here's how much new revenue I'm making. Here's how much new cost I have. And so my total profit, if I hired a second barista, is $199. So you'll walk into your model, you'll create a first version like this, and then you ask yourself, okay, am I being dumb anywhere? Have I made this too simple, right? Have I done anything silly? In which case I looked at this and I said, you know what? One person can't service 60 new orders in an hour, right? I'm not talking about hiring 10 people. I'm not talking about hiring X number of people. I'm just asking this question of should I hire one? And so I said, that's naive. That's wrong. So I went back to my inputs tab and I said, I'm going to put in sort of a throttle. I'm going to say that no one barista can handle more than 30 orders an hour if I hire someone new. Um, that they can't handle more than 30. We don't have the machine access to enough machines to support that. Just roll with my logic for the simple example. Um, and so what I did then back in my model is I put a cap in. So I said there's a total potential, but I'm actually gonna throttle that. So you could sort of see here where there was a potential for 60 new orders. The model itself, the logic of the model, I have put a little if statement in as a formula, says you can't be more than 30. So with that logic in place, I now have same cost. They're still working all day, but I'm not selling as many during that peak hour. So my upside is going to be a little lower. My profit loss is actually going to be 100 as opposed to 200, 199. That's the same question, you know, is this too naive? Well, I might look at these numbers and say, well, I'm just guessing at this lift. What if people don't show up at this level, right? What if I can't sell that many? I mean, I could say, what if this is too conservative? But in this case, let's say I got scared and said these numbers are too aggressive. Well, what's great about modeling is you don't have to pick one number, right? When you're making guesses or you're worried about an input, like just create a range, stretch it out. What's my best possible case, my most optimistic case, and what's a reasonable, most conservative case? And then let me see where do I land in between those two. That's the great thing about modeling is you could do that, not for everything, but for your most important variables, your most sort of risky and important sort of inputs to a model. The other thing that I looked at when I sort of said, well, what's naive about this? Is I said, well, I've got all these time periods where I'm not getting any lift at all, right? All these zeros. Um, so maybe I don't want to hire a barista for all day. Maybe I just want to hire them for part of the day. Well, okay, what if I just hire them during my busy morning shift? Okay. This little version just, uses this toggle, a little bit of logic, to say, if they're working, give me the number. If they're not working, zero it out. And it turns out that if they just work the 3 hours in the morning, I come out $180 ahead compared to what I am today from a sort of gross profit perspective. My cost is now 90 versus 260. I'm selling less, right? I'm selling 270 versus 360, but my costs are lower. So I come out, instead of coming out $100 ahead, I now come out $180 ahead. But what if they worked in the afternoon, right? Because I had this opportunity to sell more in the afternoon. Well, then you get into interesting, like business questions as to I'm only selling more. I only think I'm going to sell more in an hour, but can I hire someone good for just an hour in a day? Right? Maybe I need to hire them for a 3 hour shift. Again, the point is by thinking through this stuff and asking these questions, you really think through the what ifs and what the realistic probabilities are and what's really going to happen in whatever business thing you're going to do. So again, this is a very simple example, but I hope it highlights to you how, as you're thinking through something, you start asking all these questions that you won't when you're just abstracting and intuiting, should I do this or not? So in this case, I said, I don't think that I could hire someone good for 1 hour in the afternoon, but I do think I could for 3 hours in the afternoon. So let's say I do hire them for 3 hours in the afternoon. Well, how do these things differ? Okay. Um, I know what my full day costs look like. I come out $100 ahead. I came out $180 ahead if I just hire them in the morning. Well, it turns out if I hire them in the afternoon, I also come out $180 ahead. My revenue goes up, my costs go up, but I end up at the same level if I just did in the morning. Both are 180. Now, that leads to an interesting business decision, as you'd expect, right? Maybe I decide, you know what, I'm not going to take on the risk of the afternoon. I don't come out any further ahead. So I'll just hire the morning and start there. But maybe I think to myself, well, I could do some marketing to try to get some more people in the afternoon. So if I'm not any worse off by having someone in the afternoon than if I have them just in the morning, then why don't I take that risk? Why don't I go for more, hire them for the afternoon and try to drive some more revenue, but through some more marketing, right? Again, this is an example of how this exercise leads to interesting business decisions and implications. It has these ripple effects that make you think at a more sophisticated level, even with something as simple and dumb as this. Um, so I talked about a second before how I was worried about my 30% and 40% being too aggressive and how I wanted to have a more conservative case. There's a lot of different ways you can model out scenarios. You could have a lot of variables you play with. You can make them very sophisticated. You could have this, it's like one logic engine where you pump different sort of groups of numbers into. In this case, I wanted to keep it really simple. I just cloned the model above to below. I wouldn't do this if the model was really complicated. If it was bigger, I wouldn't do a cloning effect. I would actually just pump numbers, different numbers into the engine that I created. But in this case, it was so simple. I just made a duplicate of it and I changed my inputs to be much lower. Instead of 30 or 40% to be 10 or 15%. And I said, what's the results I get there? I'm losing money if I have a full hire. I'm losing money if I can't drive more revenue in the two shift, but I am coming out slightly ahead in the morning. So it does tell me that from a best to worst case scenario, the morning is a safe way to go. Maybe I want to lean there. And so at least now I sort of flex through from optimistic to conservative, and that can lead to a more informed decision. You know, Again, looking at the model and saying what might be naive about this model. Well, in this case, I looked at this and realized, oh, I just created some fractions. Well, I'm not selling partial orders. I've got my average order value. I either sell it or I don't. And so, I just put this in as an example because you want to look at your model and say, are the numbers naive or foolish in any place? Am I dividing by zero and breaking my model in any place? You can use formulas to solve for those. Like if you create a zero, you could use the is error formula to sort of zero something out rather than break your model. In this case, I just added a round formula. Where is it? I put it in here. I just said, okay, I want to round if just given the percentage that I've punched in, if it's leading to a partial order, round it. If I wanted to be really conservative, I could have used the round down formula to always choose the lower number, right? So I took my 172.5 and now it's 173. Not a big change in terms of the results, but makes the model just a little more robust, a little more believable if you're showing it to someone else. The last step, and something that I'm a real fan of, is if you're using a model to think through a business decision, always try to create a summary. So whether it's on a new tab or in this case, I just did it below, you're creating a summary, right? In this case, if I was sitting down with, let's say I had a business partner who wasn't, who didn't work the business with me, but was an investor, I could sit down and say, look, I said, if we hire one person, worst case scenario, we do not sell another cup of coffee, right? What does that look like? If I hire them all day long, I'm $260 in the red every day. I'm losing money. So like this is what it looks like. Absolute crazy worst case scenario. But I don't think it's going to be that bad. My conservative case scenario, if we hire them full hire, they'd be losing 98. If I have them for two shifts during a day, I think I'd be losing a little bit of money, but not a huge amount. But the safe bet would be doing the morning shift. But if I can sell as many orders as I think I can, my more optimistic case, I actually come out ahead. And I think what we should do is think about which case do we want to work with, and maybe I make a pitch to my business partner about why we should go for the two shifts, or maybe I've decided that I want to go with just the morning. I always believe in a summary to have a recommendation, like put forth a recommendation. And so in this case, the recommendation was move forward with the morning and expand to the afternoon if the morning's working. right? So if I was sitting down with my business partner, I wouldn't be showing the full model, wouldn't be showing all that. I can go into it if they want to see it, but I would just be showing this little summary, and I would have the recommendation that I had in place, and it would be obvious as to why I'm making that recommendation. On your summaries is often very useful to have little footnotes as well. It could be a disclaimer that some of these numbers are half baked, right? I haven't, we've made guesses and it's not fully researched. Or it could be that this is where this key input comes from, right? My business partner would want to know I'm using $20 an hour and $3 gross AOV to create these numbers. And that's the first thing they're going to ask is what's behind this if they see these outputs. You can't have a million disclaimers. You don't want to have a million disclaimers, but you do want to think through what are the obvious questions that are going to pop if someone's looking at the summary, and maybe I want to put some footnotes to answer those questions. Anyway, so here's a really just extraordinarily simple example that highlights how you might step through creating a model, creating a little engine, thinking through how do I make it more sophisticated, thinking through how can this drive a decision, how can this drive the conversation, etc. So hopefully that little taste has been useful. Some tactical tips just to wrap things up as you saw there, put your inputs in one place. It could be at the top of your tab, could be in a separate tab, but put your inputs in one place and keep notes on them. Use color coding. Logic flows vertically, time shift left to right as a general rule, even though I just broke that rule, because remember, there's no one way of doing things. Do what works for you, but as a general rule, do your logic flows vertically. Don't let one formula get too complicated. You'll put it down, you'll pick it up 2 weeks later, and you'll look at it and you go, what's in there? No one can make sense of that. So when they start getting really crazy, too many if statements or too many formulas, too much logic, break them into multiple cells, sort of break up the logic into multiple cells. Use things like anchoring. Anchoring is the dollar signs to help you copy and paste and just reduce manual labor. Things like lookups, index match, or H or V lookups will make things a lot easier for you. Look to the worksheet for what those are if you're less familiar. Beware using templates. This surprises people when I say this sometimes, but I'm a big believer in I think I said this actually at the start. I'm a big believer in starting with a blank spreadsheet. I will often reference other spreadsheets just to make sure, did I forget something? Am I missing something? What did I do before? The advantage of starting with a blank spreadsheet is it forces you to think from the bottom up through your system, right? Because remember, what I'm trying to say is that the model's not important. The decision is important. Your understanding of your business problem is important. The alignment you can get with other people is important. Those things are all important. The model is just a tool to get you there. And when you work with a template, you tend to shortcut the understanding portion. You bend to the template and you just think, what are a few inputs? But you're not asking, what is the template forgetting? How is my situation different from the template? Right? But when you start from the bottom up, when you start from that blank spreadsheet, there's nothing to be lazy about because you got to build the whole thing. So you got to think through the whole thing. Now, there's exceptions to when you might use a template, but if you're in charge of a big business decision or a big new initiative, I'd recommend that you try starting from a blank spreadsheet and maybe referencing a template, but don't build off of the template. Same thing goes for outsourcing. Don't just say, throw this over to your finance department or a business analyst and say, build the model for me and send it back, right? That's not going to help you understand your system better. So while you might have partners, someone might start what you're working on or be a partner in creating it, you want to be part of creating. If you're going to be a business person in charge of something, you want to be part of creating this yourself because, again, it's a thinking tool. I talked about Goldilocks a fair amount already, right? Don't make your models too complicated. Don't make them too simple. The key thing, again, is that if you like complicated models that look super sophisticated, people tend to convince themselves that they're real, but they're still guesses, right? You're just guessing what the future is going to be. And then lastly, get a second pair of eyes on your model. Everyone needs an editor, whether because you're writing something important or you're giving a talk. Same thing with the spreadsheet. Like have someone look at it. Chances are you're gonna make a silly error somewhere. You're gonna forget something obvious because you're just too far into it. And so get a second pair of eyes on what you do. So that's the last bit for this little sort of pre-lecture. I look forward to seeing folks in class. A lot of what we're going to be doing is really just exercise after exercise, practice after practice. For those of you who are newer to this stuff and just want to either get a refresher or exposure to some spreadsheet tips and tricks, again, I'd recommend downloading this workbook that I made quite a few years ago, but it's still quite relevant. And I look forward to seeing you in class. So I'm going to wrap up there, and I will see you when class begins. Take care, all.